My name is Matt, and I am a self-taught photographer. I've been doing photography for over 20 years and professionally for money for the last 5 years, despite the fact that I've never been to photography school, which has led me to believe that either maybe I'm a super genius or maybe photography's not that hard. However, lately I've had a realization that is calling that assumption into question. I hope you're ready for this because I wasn't. I don't know everything about photography. In fact, there are a few things that I've had such a struggle learning about photography that I'm hoping you can help me understand them. So today I'm going to tell you 3 things that I'm hoping you know the answer to about photography. Let's talk about it. So my first question is kind of a lighting question. It involves this lighting support called a C-stand. So of my own research, I have been able to learn that a C-stand stands for a century stand. It's the most common support fixture used in photography lighting. So I'm not complaining that photography has its own weird support system. In fact, I've worked in lots of industries and it seems like every industry sort of has developed its own system for rigging and support and connectors and all that stuff, right? And this is what we have in photography. So there's a pin here on top and actually a lot of nice stuff about this. Generally, I find these are super smooth actuating. They're really sturdy, almost to a fault. This probably weighs 40 pounds. And when I'm rigging up a big video head or something like that with a lighting modifier, right, for safety, this is a pretty dang sturdy fixture. I also love this. So most C-stands have this collapsing, what's called a turtle base. Look at that. That's gonna go nice and flat in my car for easy storage. And then how about this? It doesn't get better than that. So, there are lots of virtues to the C-stand. I don't have a question about its functionality. What I wanna know is, why are C-stands chrome? So the very obvious chrome plating on the C-stand really stands out to me when I put it in a grouping with all of my other stands, like tripods, black, smaller light stands, black. Everything else I use in photography and videography, black, black, black. Right, there's a reason in practice that all this stuff is black. Not only is it a basic finish because, right, this is the stuff behind the scenes, behind the camera. No one's looking at it. It doesn't have to be pretty. But also, right, when I'm on set and trying to control lighting, reflective surfaces are kind of like the worst enemy. Those are the things that are the hardest to control. Bouncing light everywhere, maybe someplace cool, more often someplace that I don't want it. And in the midst of all these intentionally black fixtures, I've got these reflective C-stands that are like dang mirrors, right? Look at the chrome fixtures on my drum set, right? That makes sense. You see these on stage, they're for presentation. The chrome plating on the bumper of a classic car and all the trim and stuff, right? Of course, it's cool, it's neat, it's shiny. Why in the world do I want this stuff in a heavily lighting controlled environment to be bright and shiny and silver? But it's actually worse than that. So I have a friend who is a wedding photographer. I'm not a wedding photographer. That will come up later for sure. So this friend of mine and I were shooting an event together. It was a formal event. We were using his equipment and he had some really awesome 600-watt aperture lights rigged up on a couple of C-stands like this. And we're setting up to do interviews and he gets these black stretchy cloth things and starts wrapping the C-stand in this cloth. And I'm like, I've never seen this before. I'm like, oh, is that for lighting control? Is that so that it's not a tripping hazard? And he says, no. In the wedding world, I very often work with a wedding, a wedding planner who asks me to wrap the C-stands in these things. These are specially made cloths for wrapping C-stands in high-end events because they think the chrome of the C-stands looks gaudy or whatever. So we are chrome plating these things, apparently at some expense of cost, resource, whatever, chrome plating these products and then sending them out and then bearing extra expense to cover up the chrome plating. However, it's not my intention to assume that there's no reason for this. Someone out there is smart enough to know why these C-stands are chrome plated. Let me know in the comments. Second, so I mentioned that I don't work in weddings a lot. On average, I shoot a wedding every 2-point-something years. Every 2.5 years, I'll shoot a wedding, probably for someone I know. However, I am a corporate and commercial photographer and videographer, and so that means I do have some experience shooting formal events, just not the wedding activity in particular. And of course, like most people, I've been to lots of weddings. Maybe I pay extra attention to the photographer at a wedding because I'm a photographer, but I think what I've observed here, probably most people will be familiar with, because my second question is about wedding photographers. So here's an example that I think will be illustrative. In April, I shot an event and the governor was in attendance and gave a speech. And as you can see in this photo, I, like anyone working this event, presented in a nice pair of dress slacks, dress shoes, even put on a long sleeve button-up dress shirt, despite the fact that I was doing a lot of physical labor at this event, lugging cameras and lights and equipment around several indoor and outdoor spaces at this event, okay? There are several other vendors of goods and services, caterers, sound people, people who manage the space, etc. A team of maybe a dozen people who are sort of the workers putting on this event. And I'm a person on this team. We're not the people on stage speaking, we're just workers at the event trying to present a dignified professional presentation. Why, when I go to a wedding, is the photographer dressed like someone in the wedding party? What's going on here? When I go to a wedding, the photographer is like the hardest working of all the vendors putting on the event. The photographer is working harder than the DJ. In my estimation, the photographer is working harder than the caterers. Yeah, they're carrying a lot of food around for a little while. A photographer is carrying, tens of pounds of gear around for hours and hours on their feet and trying to knock out a lot of work really quickly. It's strenuous. Why in the world? Wedding photographers, explain this to me. Why in the world am I watching you run around these events doing all this work, dressed to the nine in jackets, high heels and ties? Like, what is this? Again, I don't want to assume there's no reason for it. Wedding photographer friend out there, what's the mentality here? Why are you dressed up like you're in the wedding party? Okay, let's wrap this up. Last question has to do with a technology in photography called the Apple Box. So I've seen these around photography gigs and always wondered, like, what is this? Why this thing for this purpose? So what's an Apple Box? I'll tell you what I've learned from a little bit of research. So Apple Boxes are wooden boxes that are made in certain standard dimensions so that they can serve sort of general purpose, around a photo shoot, in a studio, maybe even on location, wherever you need a box. And yes, in my research, I found lots of photographers who are just nuts about Apple Boxes and seem to think that this is like the best all-purpose technology that you can buy. If I need a surface to work on, I could just stack a bunch of Apple Boxes together and now I've got a little work surface. You mean like a desk? If I'm tired of standing up, I could just stack a bunch of Apple Boxes together and I have something to sit on. You mean like a chair? If I'm taking a picture of someone and they're just too short, sure, I could lower the camera down, but why not just have them prop themselves up on an Apple Box? I'll show you what I found that does 90% of what I think an Apple Box would do for me. Wow, this is quite the all-purposes product. It can be a chair or a desk or a platform. Like, what else? It can pretty well be a chair or a desk or a platform, because it's a box. So the existence of this product is so befuddling to me that this is the only way I can think of to state this question. Why are Apple Boxes? Why are Apple Boxes? And if you think you know the answer to that or any of the other questions I posed today, I would love to hear your responses in the comments. Make us all smarter, or just do the more important thing and make me smarter. Till I see you next time, you guys keep an eye out and a foot forward. Thanks for watching. Bye.